that's the whole thing. Is Star Wars was really kind of my life when I was a little kid. It was my whole creative world. And again, I know that there's for a lot of you who are Star Wars fans, it's the same thing. There's just something about that age and your first kind of creative play being with those toys, you know. And I remember my dad brought home like the first video camera we ever got when I was like in 3rd grade, and I picked that thing up by the top handle and held it down by my knees and ran it through the space between the coffee table and the couch, and I played it back and I said, "God damn, that looks just like the trench run in Star Wars." and I was hooked. It was so it was very unexpected. It came out of the blue. It really is like, if you're a Star Wars fan and you're hearing me say this, if you just imagine that Kathy Kennedy sat you down and said, "Would you be interested in this?" and your reaction, that was basically my reaction. I just kind of went numb, and then I asked if I could think about it because I care so much about Star Wars. I wanted to take a breath and I wanted to really think, okay, is this something I'm going to be able to come in and really do? Can I do this? And I started making movies when I was a kid, and then there was never like any sort of moment of, you know, I want to be a film director. It was just kind of like a slow fade into, well, I love doing this, and I just kind of kept doing it. And I went to film school here in Los Angeles, and then when I got out of film school, I wrote the script for Brick right out of school. I was like 22 or 23, I guess, and then basically spent my 20s trying to get Brick made, and then finally, right when I was about to turn 30, finally got it made. And so anyway, that's that's, I guess, an extremely simplified to the point of being completely useless encapsulation of how I got into the film industry. Am I in the film industry? Is this, yeah? Okay, all right. Well, I do storyboards. I do my own like little chicken scratch storyboards, and and that's after I've written the script. I take a few weeks and I basically visually write the movie, and I'll just shot for shot draw it out, and then I'll sit down with my DP is my best friend, you know, from college, Steve Yedlin, and so he and I have been, you know, working together a long time, and so I'll sit down and basically I'll translate my indecipherable, you know, little stick drawings to him, shot for shot. When I was in college, I used to carry around that book, Scorsese on Scorsese, and I remember him talking about the storyboards that he did for everything, and so maybe I think that's where I got the notion that that's how it's done, I guess, you
know. In the script writing process, how do you create and develop your characters? I mean, you have such cool characters.
I don't know. I mean, it's weird because it's easier to talk process-wise about how you develop plot, but character-wise, it takes a while, and it's something that I don't know. It's something that you have to, and also there's no way to talk about it without kind of sounding like a dork, sounding like pretentious, and kind of, because you gotta start, when you start describing it, you have to start saying phrases like, you know, find a connection to the characters, get inside their head, get inside them, let them live, and you know, and then they start, and then basically, hopefully, you find a way into them, you find a way to bring them to life by connecting up with something inside you, and then at some point they start living on their own, and then your job is to stay honest to what they're doing, as opposed to trying to manhandle them into some preconceived thing that you had. So. Which sounds kind of goofy, but that's really, I don't know, that's the way it is for me. Yeah, you know.
So you said you're a night owl. How, like, when and how do you write? Like, specifically, like, just.
I write sporadically and badly with no rhyme or reason whatsoever. I don't think I could ever like actually write for a living, like write for hire, because I take so long to write, and I just it's bad, man. It's no good. But I end up when I start actually working, I slide onto typically like a vampire schedule. So I'll be up till 5 in the morning or so, and then but the middle of the night is the best time to write, I think, because the phone's never going to ring, and you're never going to have appointments with anybody. It's just kind of this quiet time where the rest of the world is dead. The editing process it really is like the completion of the writing process, and it's also the point where it's very different from the writing process, obviously, though, because with the writing process you're pulling out of thin air, and whereas with the editing process, it's almost like I don't know, as a writer-director, I find you really have to let go of your ego when you get into the editing room. You have to kind of let go of your preconceptions about what you thought you were creating to some extent. And you have to find what the material wants to be, because the first cut that you put together is basically what you had written, your script, and the preconceptions you had, you cut it together based on that. And invariably it's awful. It's terrible.
I know you have a new film coming out. You want to talk about that, or are you still working on it?
Yeah, I'm writing right now. I'm writing a sci-fi thing. That's it's very different than Bloom. It's kind of a very dark science fiction film called Looper, and I'm this is a. Let's see if I have my notebook with me. No, I don't.
Oh.
I thought I had my notebook with me. I can show you the chicken scratches that make up Looper at this point. But
yeah, that would have been cool.
That would have been so lame. We dodged a bullet.
We want to see making up.
And Looper, even though we knew that people would see it and it was a big movie and Bruce Willis was in it, we still kind of kept that same ethic of not thinking about all that, but just focusing on making something that we thought was really cool.
Felt really sad. And the fact that we weren't making it with the studio, but we were making with Endgame, and so we made it there was kind of still the feeling like we were off in our little corner doing something, it didn't feel like any of this was going to happen when we were on set. It was a very focused experience.
So where did this idea start with you?
I wrote the idea a long time ago. I wrote the idea about 10 years ago as a short film that I never ended up shooting. I wrote like a 3-page short. And I remember telling you about it when we were at Sundance with Brick, actually. So we've been talking about this for a while.
So this really is like 12 Monkeys.
Yes,
in
exactly.
every way.
Yeah, exactly. I like to get really deep inside the influences. But yeah, I've been reading a ton of Philip K. Dick, and I wrote this little short, and then it just kind of sat on my hard drive for 8 years, and then after Bloom is when I picked it back up again.
Once we decided that we were making Star Wars movies, he was one of the people that I was immediately interested in. I just think that his storytelling ability and who he is as a human being just exemplified a lot of the values and the sense of fun. I get excited when it feels like it's something new and unique.
Well, it was very sudden. It was I had met Kathy a few times before, just general kind of, getting to know you meetings that you kind of do in the business, and we had always got along. I was a big fan of hers, obviously, but I had no idea I was in the running for something like this. I really didn't, and they called me in for another meeting. I had no idea what it was about, so I walked blindly into it, and she just sprung it on me, and I was really blindsided, and I asked if I could take some time to think about it, actually.
Why did you ask time to think about it?
Well, I had...
And what were you thinking about?
Well, no, that's the thing. I had, first of all, I had, because my last film, Looper, was like a science fiction film, I had been approached with bigger stuff and just got in the habit of turning it down and just working on my own scripts. And so I was kind of in that mode, and I also just, this was different. I had been... Star Wars had been a huge emotional part of my life since I was a little kid. It had a deep connection to me going back with my father, like a lot of people in our generation, I think. So it meant a lot to me. I wanted to really take a breath and make sure that I was ready, that felt like I was able to jump into it and do something that would matter to me.
And somewhere, is there a big storyboard or a spreadsheet that says, because we spoke to J.J. Abrams in the last game, so and this is the beginning of the story. This is where we think it might go. This is where you're fitting in. Can you make A link to B and so on? Was it like that?
Not at all. No, that's not how it worked. It was the script for The Force Awakens, which I read and loved, and I loved the characters it created and the path it set them on. And then it was a conversation about, okay, what do you think happens next? And that led to, it was very wide open, and there weren't any bases we had to tag. There wasn't something we had to fit into. There wasn't a place we had to specifically get to. And that led to, a writing process where I could really just find where each of these characters wanted to go and where they wanted to end up.
Clean slate?
Clean slate, yeah. And it led to it led to giving me the freedom to find personally my way into each one of these characters and really figure out organically where it made sense for them to end up. You know?
Do you remember, as the writer of this film, was there a moment where you sat, I don't know what your writing process is, presumably you're in front of a computer, where you go, page 1, and take a deep breath and start? I mean, is there a moment that's more exciting?
Well, I mean, it's a little, the way I write, I spend the first 80% of the process outlining, a big outliner. So I start and I have these just working little moleskin notebooks, and I just, scribble and I draw. I keep working until I can basically get the whole story drawn on one arc, on one page, so I can hold it all in my head. And then I start actually writing in the notebooks. I'll write the first draft basically in these little notebooks and then translate it into the computer, and that's my first editing pass. So it's a little more diffused than that. But there is a moment where you type, fade in, or not fade in, you type opening crawl, and then you start typing it, and you type Luke Skywalker for the first time into your screenwriting program. It comes up in your character list, and you think, my God, what am I doing?
I mean, first of all, everyone says that there are Star Wars fans now making Star Wars movies.
Sure.
And it's like, yeah, but if there wasn't Star Wars fans making Star Wars movies, there wouldn't be anybody making Star Wars movies.
It's a strange thing, isn't it? Yeah, the notion that even the main official films, I don't know, they are the official films, so they're not fan fiction, but they're fiction being made by fans.
Exactly.
So where does the line get drawn? Yeah, it's very odd, and it's I think you even see it reflected in these movies. I know, in The Force Awakens, I took a real cue off of that moment where Rey hears Luke Skywalker's name, and you see her eyes light up, and I thought he was a myth. And we carry that thematically into this film, and we kind of had to. It was there not just as a meta thing, but in the actual movie, the relationships of the younger characters to these legends that they're meeting. It's kind of baked into the films a little bit. The element of fandom, I guess,
Yeah, and I think that the thing I wanted to sort of ask about that was, as somebody who is a filmmaker and someone who's a fan, how did you distinguish where that line was? When you were making it, did you go oh, this moment would be great as part of the story, or did you go, hang on, is that in a fan moment of me going, I would love to see that?
I didn't, because I think just because of the way I go about writing, I never felt like the fan part of me was something I had to put a check on like that. I feel like I just worked forward in terms of the story, and if there was something that I had in my head, oh, it'd be fun to see this or fun to see that, I tend to be pretty brutal in the writing process. So anything that didn't actually fit in the story or wasn't there for a reason always ends up falling away anyway.
Yeah.
So I actually found the fact that I had all these years of just being a Star Wars fan to draw on, I found that to be nothing but a benefit.
I mean, how was it kind of waiting for it all to get started? Because I guess you must have had to wait to a certain extent for what happened with The Force Awakens to know what your role would be in things.
I mean, a little bit, but when I was hired, they were just about to start shooting Force Awakens. So when I was hired, there was already a script. So step one was I read the script, and I kind of dove right in. It was just, okay, where should this go next? It was figuring out where did these characters each go next? What's the journey that makes sense for each of them? And then while I was writing, I was watching dailies. I was watching the footage they were shooting, so I was getting to see the actors bring these roles to life and figure out what I was responding to in their performances. So no, I kind of jumped right into it, right from the get-go, which was nice because as soon as you get your hands in and start working, the pressure kind of goes away and you're just focused on the process. It's before the work that you feel the pressure, I think. Writing's miserable. Nobody. I don't trust anyone who claims to enjoy writing. It's a miserable process. I had the most fun I've ever had writing on this, and it's still my least favorite part of the process. But it's it's also where you make the movie, really. It's and the way I do it, which is just the way I've always done it, is I work in little moleskin notebooks, and the first 80% of the process is just working in those little notebooks. Outlining.
I think I make a mistake sometimes of just going, right, open final draft, let's start.
Well, but then there are filmmakers like I can't speak for them, I don't know them, but I've heard that the Coen brothers work more like that, where they'll actually just start with an idea and go. And there are other great writers who I'm sure do that and can pull it off. I think it's just whatever works for you. For me, I have to start with an outline, and I start broad strokes, and then get the big picture, and then drill in. But I'll outline, and then I'll even write longhand. I'll write the first version of the script in those little notebooks, actually, like dialogue and everything. And then actually go into a computer is the very, very last step.
How does that work with like such a huge? Like I imagine when you're making something like Brick, that, it's like an independent movie, you do that in your own way. But with something like this, which is such a huge studio movie, maybe the huge studio movie, like how do you go, this is what I got? And it's like, there's notebooks.
It's all the same stuff.
Amazing.
Man. It's all the same thing. It's words on a page, words for actors to say. It's a story that you got to follow and you got to care about. The truth is that's been the big, because I had the same feeling coming into it that you just described. I was like, I've never done a studio movie ever. This is my first studio movie, and definitely nothing like this scale. What's going to feel different about it? And the big pleasant surprise for me was how it really is the same process as any other movie. You're just telling a story with some actors, trying to make people care about it. Yeah. And other than that, all the stuff that's bigger, it's a bigger production, but it doesn't really affect what matters about the process, oddly. Definitely not the writing. The writing is a great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you're writing fade in space or fade in school. Yeah. It's you're still then you have that log line, and then you have to make a scene work.
And this film picks up immediately. I don't know. This isn't a spoiler. It picks up immediately. The last film finishes, which is quite different for a Star Wars film. Is that did you know that was that always the case that we were going to pick up pretty much straight away?
Well, that's directly from my watching The Force Awakens and the amazing moment that JJ ended that movie on, of Rey holding the lightsaber out to Luke. And these movies usually jump ahead a few years. I want to see what happens next. I thought you need to see what happens next in that moment. That led to, okay, we're going to do this a little differently. We're going to pick it up directly where that left off. Steve's talking about is basically the timing of it worked so that while I was writing the script for The Last Jedi and even coming up with a story for it, they were shooting The Force Awakens. So they were in London shooting. I was in San Francisco writing. And so I would get weekly kind of reels of kind of the best of everything they had shot that week. And I didn't see a movie until the script was way done and we were starting prep. But I did get to see these dailies, and seeing John, in that part of Finn, seeing Daisy, seeing dailies from the scene between Adam and Daisy, the mind-reading scene. It was that kind of stuff that, it works on the page and you know what you're emotionally reacting to on the page, but until you really see those actors bringing those characters to life and see what you've got, being able to kind of see that and write to that was a huge deal, actually. JJ was really gracious. There was one little thing that I have talked about before that I asked if he could change. Originally, it was BB-8 that came with Rey to the islands on the Falcon, and R2 stayed behind. And I just asked him if it was it would affect one shot, and I asked him if he could switch the droids, and he was super, super gracious and did that.
The Last Jedi, how early on did you have that title? How close did it come to being something else?
Yeah, I had that title from the word go, really before I even started typing the script. When I was still coming up with the story, for some reason that title just seemed really, really right to me, and it never changed. And it felt so right to me that I was constantly petrified that it was either going to leak online or somebody was going to guess it, because I actually thought it was a pretty obvious title. So here's a secret. There's somebody at Disney and Lucasfilm who like monitors for leaks on potential leaks online. So anytime like an email would pop up with someone from that department, I would hold my breath and click it and just, please don't have guessed the title, don't have the title, and then it would be, oh, thank God.
I mean, there's like...
What were the fake titles that were coming out? People, it was like, the Legends of the Jedi Temple or something was like a front runner. And I was like, we got a better title than that. This is gonna be good.
Well, there was like Reddit threads, which were like pretty much like a computer algorithm, like running through possible
Every
titles.
possible combination.
Yeah, there's only so many.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
The opening crawl. How did you come up with the opening crawl? How close did it come to being something else? And what is it like writing an opening crawl of Star Wars?
It's petrifying, but it's a good way to kind of jump into the pool. It's so when I first started writing the script, I realized, oh my God, the first thing I have to write is an opening crawl for a Star Wars. And so I just did it. I just wrote a version of it. And the truth is, it is, and I've heard in interviews Lucas talk about this, he kind of talks about it as if it's like a poem, sort of. And that made a lot of sense to me, having gone through this, not because you're like getting poetic with it or whatever, but because every single word matters. And it is this sort of thing. It was the very last piece of writing in the movie that we were working on, literally like a few days before we had to give the movie up and say, okay, we can't touch it anymore. So when I realized that what Luke's arc was going to be through this, and the whole notion of, and that itself was like a big, long process. It was kind of the first thing I felt like I had to figure out coming into it was, and it all stems from one question, which is, what is Luke doing on that island? Why is he taking himself out of the fight? And it's got to be a reason that I believe in from his perspective, from his point of view, and the reason that feels consistent with who he is. And so once I kind of landed on that and figured out, okay, he thinks he's doing the right thing by taking the Jedi out of the equation, and then that means he's rejecting this whole notion of the galaxy having this blind hero worship of this legend of Luke Skywalker. And he thinks if he takes that out of the equation, then maybe the light will be able to rise from a worthier source. And his whole thing is, and the path of the movie is him realizing that no, the galaxy needs that, and the galaxy needs that legend, and they need the hope that brings, and he needs to step up and be that for everybody. And then once he does that at the end, once he does kind of, it's not about him beating somebody with a lightsaber, it's not about him winning a fight, it's about him lighting this big beacon of hope that is the legend of Luke Skywalker for people to look up to. Once he does that, the notion that, okay, we've now built this huge emotional arc for him. This is now the place for him having accomplished this, both in terms of thinking of the most powerful point for him to then choose to pass on, but also thinking about looking at, I didn't know what was going to happen in 9. At that point, I didn't even know who was going to be making 9. But the notion that him like passing to the next realm would actually give more potential for what his role could be in 9, as opposed to him just still being around and kind of going along with them on the mission, whatever. So all of this led up to, oh wow, okay, so this needs to happen in the end of the movie. I think the expectation that this would be much closer to the Luke from that was the hero, that like his hero's journey in the original trilogy.
Right.
And whereas for me, this is 30 years later, and not only that, this is, if you look at any classic kind of hero's myth that actually is worth its salt. If you look at the beginning of the hero's journey, like with King Arthur, he pulls the sword from the stone, he's ascendant, he has setbacks, but he unites all the kingdoms, he gets all his knights together, or Beowulf with him, killing Grendel's mother and taking it all down and having that victory and getting his own hall. And there's always that first arc, but then any one of these things that then if you keep reading, and if it then goes past that and deals with the hero's life as they get into middle age and beyond, it always starts to get into, you think about King Arthur betrayed by his, best friend and his wife, and then ultimately, depending on what version you read, coming up against the product of, somebody who has completely usurped his kingdom and the product of incest from him, and he has to kill him, but only at the cost of his own life. And it gets into darker places.
It gets dark, man.
Well,
really
and Beowulf falls, and and there's a reason for that. It's because myths are not made to sell action figures. Myths are made to reflect the most difficult transitions we go through in life.
Yeah.
And that early part of the hero's journey is reflecting I think, this is my interpretation, going from adolescence into adulthood, where you're ascendant and you're finding yourself and you're winning. In order for something that addresses middle age and beyond in a really honest way, if you look at the myths, they like the Fisher King, it deals with disillusionment. It feels like starting to feel like you're losing your place in the world. It feels like everything changing and loss. And that's because they're honest, and that's because they have to be honest, because that's what these things are there for, and I feel like it would be a betrayal of them and of Luke Skywalker as a character not to take it seriously enough to reflect that, I think, and to just give us the waxworks version of Luke that we might love and expect, because he's up there and as it's the action figure in plastic on our wall looking heroic and stuff. But if you want to take him seriously as a character, for me at least, it felt important to go into that realm. So anyway, as you can tell by my 45-minute dissertation on it,
you thought about it a little bit?
I've given it some thought, but a lot of that thought was because, and to Mark's credit, it was because Mark challenged me on it. And because I had to then articulate this stuff. I had to think it through. I had to get into, this felt right to me, but why did it feel right? And I couldn't just say, screw you, because this is my story, because you can't do that. You have to get into the conversation, and that's nothing but a good thing, so.
One of the things that I love about this movie, I think I mentioned it to you before, is how anyone can be a hero. It's awesome, it's beautiful, and it resonates. How early on did you know that was going to be like a major theme of the film?
Well, it's interesting, because it definitely was something that slowly kind of emerged. But I mean, the truth is, that was never kind of like a driving thing for me in the movie. And I've talked a little bit elsewhere about, obviously the big decision with Rey and her parents. That is, that's one of the big things of, okay, it's cutting loose the idea of her being special coming from lineage. And that is true, and I do like that. I think that's a good thing. That wasn't, though, the motivating factor behind that decision. It was more of a dramatic decision of just what is the toughest thing that she could hear about her parents. What is the thing for her and us that will make her have to stand on her own 2 feet and will just make things hardest for her, because she's the hero and that's her job, is for things to be hard for her. So it was more, it came from that, and the other element of it was something that came along with that I also really liked. But it's not like I didn't sit down with, how do we overturn this whole thing of Star Wars lineage? That wasn't the driving factor. It was almost like a byproduct of a natural process of, this is what's going to make sense for her as a character, as a dramatic turn there, and that means this, and that's kind of nice. So that then works into the rest of the movie like this, and it's kind of a hazy, dramatic. It's kind of a strange, organic process, I guess.
A lot of people say that the broom boy at the end must be significant because he has the Force, and we see him on screen showing he has it. But I feel that it's part more of the larger theme that anyone can be a hero, the rebellion. Can you talk about that kid and his significance? How close did the broom boy, come to the editing room floor?
Well, I like the way you think about him. And yeah, it was something that I don't think it was ever.
I don't know. Does he have a name besides Broom Boy?
He does. Pablo made up a totally unpronounceable name that I can never remember. I call him. I thought I like Broom Boy. Let's stick with Broom Boy. It was never something that was, I think, actually in my mind at least, I was never gonna cut it from the movie. It was something that occasionally would come up, like, because we had that really nice scene with Leia and Rey and everybody in the Falcon. You're pulling back and it zooms off into hyperspace. You could iris out right there. But the truth is, for me, that scene was, at the end with the kid, was more than nice, and it was more than it wasn't really even about the kid and everyone can be a hero. It was about Luke and Luke's sacrifice. And to me, it was about Luke's ultimate act of coming back and accepting this mantle. I mean, I guess the first thing to say is coming into writing this or any story, the object is not to subvert expectations. The object is not surprise.
Yeah.
I think that would lead to some contrived places. The object is drama. And in this case, the object was figuring out path for each one of these characters where we challenge them and thus learn more about each of them by the end of the movie. So, that having been said, Kylo's arc in this movie I saw as, okay, I want, besides his relationship with Rey, the big arc for Kylo in this movie was breaking down this kind of unstable foundation that he's on and then building him to where by the end of the film, he's no longer just a Vader wannabe, but he's stepped into his own as kind of a quote-unquote villain, but a complicated villain that you understand, right? So with that in mind, the idea that Kylo would get to that place by the end of it led me to think, well, then what is Snoke's place at the end? And does that work with him just kneeling before Snoke at the end? No, if Kylo's got to get to a place of actual power, the ultimate expression of that would be him, ascending beyond his master. And that also then gives the opportunity to have a great dramatic moment that you don't expect of getting Snoke kind of out of the way. So that really is where it all stemmed from. It was thinking about Kylo's path, thinking about where I wanted him to be at the end of the movie to set him up for the next film, and thinking, okay, that means we're going to clear away this slightly more familiar dynamic of the Emperor and the pupil, clear the boards from that, and then that's much more exciting going into 9, the notion of now we just have Kylo as the one that they have to deal with. You can no longer take a rational guess at how the Snoke-Kylo thing is going to play out in the next movie.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting.
Kylo says that line, kill the past, whatever. It seems like your movie is kind of representative of that. Like, to move on with Star Wars, to move on to the future, you kind of have to let go of...
well, it's an interesting aspect of it. It's an interesting theme. And it's, for me, the balance was... Because Kylo is saying that, and interestingly to me, Luke is kind of saying his own version of that as well. And... it's really Rey who is the balance, who I think, and Rey is where my heart lies in terms of in that theme and where we end up by the end of the movie. Kylo was that was the character that I was most excited about getting into and writing, and coming out of The Force Awakens, seeing that character, and because in the first Star Wars films, Vader was a great villain, but he was never someone that you identified with. You identified with Luke's relationship to him. Whereas, especially in the context of these stories being about, the transition from adolescence into adulthood. So you're identifying with Luke. He's the one going through that transition, and Vader is something he essentially has to navigate to get there. Whereas with Kylo is not really that for Rey. It's almost like Rey and Kylo are two halves of the protagonist. Rey the dark and Rey the light and Kylo the dark, and that is thrilling to me. That's my favorite kind of bad guy, are the ones that you identify with. And in this case, in a way, you identify with him as much as you do Rey. When we were preparing to make this movie, we watched a bunch of films. We watched, I sat down with the story group, and I came up with, at Lucasfilm, I just came up with a list of movies I thought would be good to kind of draw inspiration from. And 12 O'Clock High was one of them, which is the great film with Gregory Peck, and it's kind of about World War II bombers. And that ended up leading to this opening sequence of kind of a bombing run. I love this character of Maz. In early drafts of the script, there was more Maz in it. Originally, I had her actually on the cruiser, and I just slowly found as I was writing it that so much of the stuff I had her doing, especially as the script got bigger and bigger, I could be more economical if gave those beats to our main characters. The character of DJ came about basically as I was coming up with what Finn's whole journey was going to be. The notion of and this is something that I don't know, was for me, I really kind of related to Finn's whole journey of being one where it's he's left the bad guys, but is there the cynicism of DJ that DJ brings to it, and Finn having to decide there is cynicism, yes there is corruption, yes it's a big messy system, but there are people fighting for the right things and people fighting for the wrong things, and I want to be fighting with the people for the right things. And that felt like a really powerful thing to actually challenge and for Finn to actually get to by the end of the movie. And that meant I had to present in the most seductive way possible the cynicism of it all. So I knew it had to be a new character because it had to be someone who was genuinely cynical to his bones. He was not a scoundrel with a heart of gold who's going to turn around at the end. He really believed in this point of view. And that's where the creation of DJ came. And, the movie is kind of structurally built around sort of our three leads. There's Finn, there's Rey, and there's Poe. And each one of them has kind of and sort of like an angel and a devil on their shoulder a little bit. Rey has Luke and Kylo, Poe has Leia and Holdo, and it's a little different. And Finn has DJ and Rose. And so I needed the balance of someone to balance Rose, and that's kind of where DJ came from. So hardest to write for is, honestly, it was just in terms of figuring out what their story was going to be. Honestly, it was Poe, because Poe is such a clear-cut, simple character in 7, and he's awesome because he's just Oscar Isaac, and he's like the most charismatic man in the universe, and he's just rad. But then, yes, absolutely, give it up. And honestly, I was talking about this the other day. I actually wrote in the very first draft I wrote of it, like Poe went with Finn on the mission to Canto Bight, and the two of them were going to be together on the mission. And it didn't work at all because those two get along too well, and so it was just really boring. And so when I split them apart, I thought, okay, so Poe can have his own deal. God, what is Poe's deal? What's his? And that's finding the thing of, okay, so he's a hero, but he has to learn how to become a leader. And Leia needs him to mature beyond kind of brash heroics into someone who can actually take on the mantle of leading this resistance. But kind of getting there. I guess I didn't even think, like, Luke was obviously the hardest overall, but besides for Luke, I guess, the Poe was probably the trickiest. Of all the surprises and twists, was there anything that kind of surprised me? The short answer is all of them. That's the thing. You try and because it really is this strange thing, and I don't know if you write, you probably experience the same thing where this always sounds so kind of like, artsy fartsy when you say it, but it's genuinely actually nuts and bolts true that if the story is going forward, as a writer, it's more a process of discovery than it is construction. And especially when you hit something that feels right, it always surprises you because it's more like uncovering dinosaur bones of a skeleton that wants to have a certain shape than it is sculpting something, I guess, if that makes sense. Well, it was, I didn't find the writing process to be that, it's weird. I've tried and failed to kind of articulate concisely why it didn't feel that different from writing a movie from scratch, at least the ones that I have. I guess mostly because the movies I've written from scratch have mostly been genre movies or spins on genre movies. And so with those, you're working with a certain box anyway. That box is the genre, and you choose how to ride it, how to use it, how to subvert it, how to pay it off. And with this, it was kind of a similar thing, except the genre was a Star Wars movie. And it was a genre I deeply loved and something I felt like I knew, I had a personal, everyone has their own idea of what a Star Wars movie is, obviously, but I felt my personal idea of what it was a very strong thing I've had since childhood. So it actually felt oddly, the process felt oddly familiar and definitely not more restrictive than any of the previous things I've written.
Ram, I understand that Ryan made life a lot easier than it could have been by getting the script in early. You guys had a lot of time to work on things, right?
Ryan delivered the script, I think, 13, the first draft, that everybody responded, Kathy and everybody in the studio responded super positively, probably like 13 or 14 months before we start filming, which doesn't really happen in this world and this kind of big movies. So we had a lot of time to prep, and that made the process very smooth and allowed us to make this ambitious movie.
The Force Awakens had not even been fully in the canon, right? When you turned in your...
Yeah, I started writing just as they were going into their production, into shooting it. So I had read the script, and then I was watching dailies from The Force Awakens, and I was writing what happens next, kind of based on that.
Remember, we started shooting this movie before 7 came out. That was weird.
That's actually true. That's legitimately true, yeah.
I was just reminded of that.
Wow, I
right
forgot.
out here.
Yeah.
He wrote the script, which I'm sure a lot of people don't necessarily realize. I think it's something that he thought about a long time before he ever put pen to paper. And then he went off. I remember he was in a driving snowstorm up in the mountains, putting the final touches on the script. And then he came back just bubbling over with ideas and excitement. So he has this interesting way that he works where he needs that time alone. And then he's so incredibly collaborative when he comes into the process of making a movie.
That's fantastic. It sounds like it was a really good working relationship, a lot of fun.
Really great.
Awesome. What would you say excites you the most about The Last Jedi?
You know, I think he's done an exceptional job of taking these new characters and some of the legacy characters and moving us to this next place. I think he doesn't answer all the questions. I will say that up front. But
Good.
there are certain questions he does answer in a really wonderfully provocative way, and I think there'll be some surprises that people aren't expecting.
Yeah, the collaboration with Kathleen Kennedy. No, it was, I mean, again, very collaborative from the very start, but there was, no, the pushback was, the type of pushback that always happens when you're coming up with a story, which is, oh, I don't know about that, but maybe this, okay, that, then maybe this. But there was nothing where it was just like her, like, shutting you down. That's not her style, honestly. Like, I felt, and coming into it, that was one of the big questions for me, is what is this process going to be like? Because I've just always written my own stuff and made it. And, the process felt, kind of shockingly close to that. Kathy just put a lot of faith into us in the story group, and she obviously, was really on board with what we did, I guess. Yeah. It was never a situation where I was like coming up with a bunch of stuff, writing a script, and then putting it through a slot and holding my breath, like, are they going to like this? And that was part of why I wanted to just move up to San Francisco and be involved with them during the process of coming up with all this stuff. So literally the entire thought process from square one as to how we got to each of these decisions, they were involved in, and we worked together on. It was very collaborative, and because of that, also even the stuff that feels like it kind of pushes it out there, because we all went on the journey together of kind of discovering it. It never felt scary, and also because I guess we all knew how we got there and believed in it, I think, and it felt honest to all of us. That was always the big litmus test, is does this feel honest and true to these characters we grew up with? And so because of that, it never felt like, oh, are we actually doing this? It felt like, yeah, if this is true, then this is true, and this makes sense, and so, yeah.
But the truth is that you didn't do this in a vacuum. You wrote a script that you showed Kathleen Kennedy, and you showed the people at Lucasfilm and the story group, and there's a big group of people that sign off on the idea and what you're going to do. It's not like you in a vacuum saying, I'm doing this. You know what I mean? So can you sort of talk about the collaboration with Lucasfilm and with the key people where you're pitching your ideas and getting feedback?
It was a very collaborative process, and I wanted it to be. That was kind of the whole reason I moved up to San Francisco for a few months while I was coming up with the story. I really, I love Kathy. I really fell in love with Kiri Hart and Pablo and all the folks in the story group up at Lucasfilm. They are just the smartest, coolest people whose hearts are so in the right place for all this stuff. So, when I moved up there, I wanted to come in. I would come in a few times a week. I would just dump everything that I was thinking of on the table with these guys, and we would try and be really just thoughtful in terms of working through it all. And the truth is, more than anything, more than holding me back, they gave me permission, I guess, to try stuff that I might have otherwise self-edited out of fear. They were really like, I don't know, they were just wonderful creative collaborators, I guess. But yeah, it's a very collaborative and an incredibly thoughtful process. Every single thing that's in the movie, there's all of us just, we give a lot of thought as to, especially the big stuff. We grew up with this stuff. We love it dearly. It means a lot to all of us, obviously. And so, we want to get it right.
Lucasfilm puts out a lot of books, comics, a lot of canon, everything that they're producing. How much do you look at that and in the writing process and, try to incorporate it? And how much are you sort of just writing it and then Lucasfilm can tell you, no, that doesn't work because we did it in that comic book?
Right. Well, because this new trilogy, first of all, because of kind of the decision that was made way before I came on board that all the backlog of all the extended universe stuff was not going to officially apply canon-wise to this. The fact that we were forging ahead in the timeline with this new trilogy meant there wasn't a lot of stuff that we had to back into in terms of that. But still, you want to be true to the spirit of it, and so I basically, Pablo was my, Pablo Hidalgo, I don't know if I read, he works at Lucasfilm. He's been there for years and years. He's one of the loveliest men on the universe, and he's also just kind of the keeper of the flame of Star Wars lore, and he was kind of my spirit animal through the whole thing. So basically, one of the really interesting things when I wrote the script, the intercutting, the Star Wars-y kind of intercutting of all the main plots, there was a lot more of it originally, and I found this interesting. One of the things, once we got in the cutting room and started putting the whole movie together, you would think that big intercutting would increase the energy and increase the pacing, and for some strange reason, it did the opposite, and we ended up, my editor Bob Doucet and we ended up more and more shuffling stuff and putting big chunks together and letting sequences play out for longer. And the big example of that is the whole section from basically when Rey leaves the island to when the Mega Destroyer blows up, Holdo blows the Mega Destroyer up. That whole segment of Finn and Poe with their mission, and they're on the Mega Destroyer sneaking in, getting caught, and Rey in the throne room and all the stuff in the hangar. Originally, that intercut a lot more. If you watch the movie, you notice basically Finn and Rose's mission on the Mega Destroyer and Poe's mutiny play out in one long string. And originally, that was written and originally cut to be hopping back and forth a lot more with Rey and Snoke in the throne room. It just didn't work, and I think it was just a matter of once you were in one of those storylines, you wanted to see it through. It made it feel elongated by hopping back and forth. 100%. The editing process is, I'm not saying anything new here, but it's the completion of the writing process, It's where you finish writing the movie.
Did you find anything in this where you were just like, hang on, if I put that there instead?
An insane amount of stuff. At some point, I want to put out there the shooting draft of the script so that everyone can, and that's actually what we shot and how we first assembled it, so that everyone can see how much shuffling and splicing and taking stuff out and rearranging stuff we ended up doing quite a lot, because you have to, again, it's similar to being on set. It's not like you can just stick to your plan. You got to make the movie work, and if something about it isn't working, and inevitably it won't be, you put that first assembly together. If you watch it and don't want to shoot yourself in the head, then you're doing something wrong. You always want to just hide under a rock after you see the first assembly. And then you get to work and you start, okay, God, we spent a week and built this magnificent set to shoot this scene, but it's slowing us down and we don't need it.
You asked JJ to adjust something in episode 7 that for episode 8. JJ is doing 9. He came on publicly late to the process. Did Lucasfilm or JJ ask you to adjust anything in 8 because of 9?
Well, because of the timing, there really wasn't that opportunity, because when he came on and started coming up with the stuff, it was too late. We had already delivered the movie. So, there's, unless we special edition that shit. I don't know.
I was gonna say, with Star Wars, you never know.
Do I have a favorite line of dialogue in the film? That's a very good question. I should have thought of something. I should have realized that question. My favorite lines are all really dumb little things. You know what my favorite line of dialogue is that I didn't write, actually? This was something that Benicio came up with. When Finn says, you're wrong to him, originally I had written some
movie line where he's like, yeah, I'm wrong and rich or something like that, something terrible. And Benicio was the one, he like sidled up to me in between takes and was like, I don't like that line, man. Sounds like a movie line. I was like, yeah, that does sound like a movie line. You're right. And he said, I'll just say maybe. I was like, yes, yes. So that's my favorite line of dialogue.